David never expected his life to change when he walked into that small building on campus. He was just looking for a quiet place to work on his latest documentary project. The sign outside read Cultural Heritage Center, but he had no idea what that really meant. Inside, the walls were covered with old photographs, traditional clothes hanging behind glass cases, and strange musical instruments he had never seen before. The place smelled like old books and something else he couldn't identify, maybe incense or dried flowers. He was setting up his laptop when he heard music coming from the back room. Not regular music, but something different, something that made him stop typing and listen. The melody was haunting, beautiful in a way that gave him goosebumps. Following the sound, he found a young woman practicing what looked like a traditional dance. She moved with such grace, her hands telling a story he couldn't understand but somehow felt. Her long dark hair flowed as she spun, and her eyes were closed like she was lost in another world. When the music stopped, she opened her eyes and saw him standing there. For a moment, neither of them spoke. She looked embarrassed, like he had caught her doing something private. "I'm sorry," David said quickly. "I heard the music and I didn't mean to interrupt." "It's okay," she replied, but he could tell she was still a bit uncomfortable. "I work here. I was just practicing." "That was incredible," he said, and he meant it. "What kind of dance was that?" Her face lit up a little. "It's from my people. We call ourselves the Mountain People. Our ancestors have been doing this dance for hundreds of years." David introduced himself and explained he was a filmmaker who made documentaries about interesting cultures and traditions. The woman's name was Luna, and she was an archivist at the center. Her job was to collect and preserve the stories, songs, and dances of her people before they disappeared forever. As they talked, David noticed something sad in Luna's voice when she spoke about her work. She told him about how fewer and fewer young people from her community cared about the old ways. Many had moved to big cities and forgotten where they came from. "My grandmother used to say that our traditions need passion to survive," Luna explained as she showed him around the center. She said that without real feeling, without people who truly care, the dances become just movements, the songs become just noise, and the stories become just words. David looked at the exhibits around them: beautiful crafts, ancient tools, colorful ceremonial clothes. Everything looked perfect, but Luna was right. Something was missing. These were just objects in cases, not living traditions. "How many people still practice these traditions?" David asked. Luna's smile faded. "In my village, maybe 20 elders who remember the old ways, but they're getting older every year. The young people think it's boring, old-fashioned. They want modern things, modern life." She walked over to a display case containing a beautiful silver necklace with intricate designs. "This belonged to my great-grandmother. She wore it during ceremonies when she led the women in traditional songs. But when she died, no one wanted to learn the songs. Now this necklace just sits here, silent." David could hear the pain in her voice. He watched as she touched the glass case gently, like she was trying to connect with something that was slipping away. "What about you?" he asked. "You're young, and you obviously care." "I try," Luna said. "But I'm just one person. Our traditions were meant to be shared by the whole community. They were meant to bring people together, to celebrate who we are. Now it's just me and a few elders trying to keep something alive that most people think is already dead." David found himself genuinely moved by her story. As a filmmaker, he had always been drawn to unique cultures and forgotten histories. But this felt different. This wasn't just about making an interesting documentary. This was about people losing their identity, their connection to their ancestors. "Would you show me more?" he asked. "About your people, your traditions." Luna looked surprised. "You really want to know?" "Yes, I do. And maybe I could help document some of this. Create something that could show others how beautiful your culture is." For the first time since they had started talking, Luna smiled a real smile. Not the polite smile she had given him when he first interrupted her practice, but a smile that reached her eyes. "You would do that?" "I would love to," David said, and he realized he meant it more than he had meant anything in a long time. Luna began pulling out photo albums, old recordings, and handwritten notes. She showed him pictures of her village nestled in the mountains, where her people had lived for generations. She played recordings of elders singing traditional songs, their voices full of emotion, even though David couldn't understand the words. As the afternoon turned to evening, David found himself completely absorbed in Luna's world. She told him stories her grandmother had told her, explained the meaning behind different dances, and shared the history of her people's struggles and celebrations. "Our people believe that everything in nature has a spirit," Luna explained as she showed him a photograph of a ceremony taking place by a mountain lake. "These dances, these songs, they're our way of connecting with those spirits, of staying connected to the land and to each other." David looked at the photograph and then at Luna. He could see that same spiritual connection in her when she danced. It wasn't just performance. It was worship. It was love. It was identity. "When can I meet more of your people?" David asked. "When can I visit your village?" Luna's eyes widened. "You want to come to the village?" "If they'll have me. I want to. Understand this better, I want to help tell your story." Luna was quiet for a moment. Then she nodded slowly. "I think they would like that. It's been a long time since someone from outside showed real interest in who we are." As David packed up his things to leave, he felt something he hadn't felt in years. Purpose. Real purpose. This wasn't just another project. This was a mission. He was going to help save something beautiful and important from disappearing forever. Little did he know, he was about to become much more involved than he could ever imagine. 6 months had passed since David first arrived in the mountain village. What was supposed to be a 2-week visit had stretched into half a year. His apartment in the city was gathering dust, his film equipment sat unused, and his friends had stopped calling. But every time David thought about leaving, something would happen that made him stay a little longer. Elena would ask him to help organize the spring ceremony. Pedro would want to show him a new carving technique. The children would beg him to teach them more games from the outside world. The village had transformed in ways that amazed everyone. The evening gatherings now drew 30 or 40 people instead of 15. Young mothers brought their babies, teenagers volunteered to help set up chairs. Even some of the men who used to avoid cultural events now showed up regularly. But David was starting to feel trapped. One morning, he woke up with a heavy feeling in his chest. His documentary project was supposed to be finished months ago. His savings were running low. His career was on hold while he lived in this beautiful but isolated place. He found Luna preparing for the weekly storytelling circle. "Luna, I need to talk to you about something," David said, sitting down beside her. "What's wrong? You look worried." "I think I need to go back to the city soon, maybe for a few weeks, just to take care of some things." Luna's face changed instantly. The smile disappeared, replaced by something that looked like panic. "You're leaving?" "Just temporarily," David said quickly. "I have work to finish, bills to pay. Adult stuff, you know." But Luna didn't look relieved. "How long would you be gone?" "I'm not sure. Maybe a month. Maybe 2. That evening, Luna called a meeting with the village elders. David wasn't invited, but he could hear their voices through the thin walls of the community hall. They were speaking in their native language, but he could tell from their tone that they were worried. Elena came to see him the next morning. "David, Luna told us you're thinking of leaving." "Only for a while," David said. "I'll come back." Elena looked at him with sad eyes. "You don't understand what you've done for us." "What do you mean?" Before you came, we were just going through the motions, keeping traditions alive because we felt we had to, not because we wanted to. You reminded us why these things matter. You made us feel proud of who we are again. David felt uncomfortable. But that pride should come from inside. You, not from me. Should, yes, but it doesn't work that way. When you see someone else get excited about something you've always taken for granted, it changes how you see it yourself. Over the next few days, David noticed that word of his possible departure had spread through the village. People kept approaching him with worried expressions. "You won't forget us when you go back to the city, will you?" asked Anna, the flower grower. "Promise you'll come back for the harvest festival," said Pedro, the wood carver. "Without you here, who will ask us questions about the old stories?" wondered Elena. Each conversation made David feel more guilty. He had never intended to become so important to their community. He just wanted to learn and help document their culture. But the truth was becoming clear. Somehow, without meaning to, he had become the spark that kept their cultural fire burning. His enthusiasm, his questions, his genuine interest had become essential to their sense of purpose. 2 weeks later, David made the decision to return to the city for a month. He needed to finish his documentary, meet with clients, and remember who he was outside of this mountain village. The goodbye ceremony the villagers organized for him was heartbreaking. Elena sang the mountain spirit song he had learned. Pedro gave him a carved bird to remember them by. Children drew pictures for him to take with him. "Promise you'll come back," Luna said as she drove him to the bus station. "I promise," David said, and he meant it. But back in the city, David felt lost. His apartment seemed too quiet, too empty. His friends wanted to hear about his vacation, but he couldn't explain what he had experienced. They didn't understand why he looked so sad when talking about beautiful mountain villages and traditional ceremonies. 3 weeks into his city stay, Luna called him crying. "David, you have to come back." "What's wrong? What happened?" "Everything's falling apart. After you left, people stopped coming to the gatherings. Elena says there's no point in singing the songs if no one really cares to hear them. Pedro has put away his carving tools. The children ask every day when you're coming back." David felt his heart sink. "Luna, this is exactly what I was afraid of." "What do you mean?" "You've all become dependent on me. Your culture shouldn't need me to survive." Luna was quiet for a moment. "Maybe you're right. But right doesn't change what's happening. Our spring ceremony is next week and only 5 people have said they'll attend." "5 people, David? Last year we had 50. That night, David couldn't sleep. He walked around his apartment, looking at the photos Luna had given him. Pictures of villagers laughing, dancing, celebrating. Pictures of children learning traditional games. Pictures of Elena teaching him songs with joy in her eyes. His phone rang again the next morning. This time it was Elena herself. "David, my boy, please come home." "Elena, the village is your home, not mine." "No," Elena said firmly. "Home is where people need you. Home is where you make a difference. These old traditions, they've been sleeping for so long. You woke them up. Without you, they're going back to sleep." "But that's not healthy," David protested. "A culture shouldn't depend on one outsider." "Maybe not," Elena agreed. "But sometimes we need help to remember who we are. Sometimes we need someone from outside to show us what we have." David hung up the phone, feeling more confused than ever. He cared deeply about these people and their beautiful traditions. But he also had his own life to live. How could he be responsible for keeping an entire culture alive? His city friends didn't understand his dilemma. "Just go back if you want to," his best friend Jake told him. "Or don't. It's not your problem." But it felt like his problem. It felt like if he stayed in the city, something precious and irreplaceable would die, and it would be his fault for abandoning the people who had trusted him. The phone calls from the village continued. Luna called to tell him that the traditional weaving circle had been canceled because only 2 women showed up. Pedro called to say he was thinking of selling his carving tools because no one seemed interested in learning the craft anymore. Each call made David feel worse. He had tried to help, but instead he had created a situation where an entire community's cultural identity depended on him. A month turned into 6 weeks, then 2 months. David found himself unable to concentrate on his work in the city. He couldn't enjoy movies or restaurants or any of the things he used to love. His mind was always in the mountains, wondering how Luna was doing, whether Elena was still singing, whether the children were still asking about him. He realized he was trapped. He couldn't be happy in the city knowing what was happening in the village. But he couldn't spend his whole life being responsible for other people's connection to their own culture. Something had to change, but David had no idea what. 3 months had passed since David left the village, and he was falling apart. He couldn't eat properly, couldn't sleep through the night, and couldn't focus on anything for more than a few minutes. His documentary project sat unfinished on his computer. His clients had stopped calling after he missed too many meetings. Every morning, David would wake up thinking about the mountain village. He wondered if Elena was still singing alone in her kitchen. He pictured Pedro's carving tools, gathering dust in the corner. He imagined Luna sitting in the empty cultural center, surrounded by silent artifacts that no longer meant anything to anyone. The worst part was the guilt. David felt like he had given these people hope and then taken it away. He had shown them what their culture could be when it was alive and celebrated, and then he had abandoned them to return to their lonely traditions. His friends and family were getting worried about him. His sister came to visit and found him sitting in his dark apartment, staring at photos from the village. "David, you look terrible," she said, opening the curtains to let in some light. "When was the last time you showered?" "I don't know," David mumbled. "What day is it?" "It's Thursday. You missed our lunch date again." David had completely forgotten. "I'm sorry, I can't stop thinking about them." "About who?" "The village people. Luna and Elena and all the others. They needed me, and I just left them." His sister sat down beside him. "David, you can't save everyone. You can't be responsible for an entire culture." "But what if I could have been? What if I was the one thing that could have kept their traditions alive and I was too selfish to do it?" "That's not selfish. That's human. You have your own life to live." But David didn't feel human anymore. He felt like a machine that was broken, unable to function in either world. He couldn't be happy in the city knowing what he had left behind, but he was terrified of going back and becoming trapped forever. The phone calls from the village had stopped after the first month. David didn't know if this was good news or bad news. Maybe they had found their own way to keep their culture alive, or maybe they had given up entirely and didn't want to make him feel guilty anymore. 2 weeks later, David was lying on his couch in the middle of the afternoon when someone knocked on his door. He ignored it at first, thinking it was probably his sister coming to check on him again. But the knocking continued, gentle but persistent. When he finally opened the door, Luna was standing there with a small suitcase and tears in her eyes. "Luna?" David could barely believe what he was seeing. "What are you doing here? How did you find my apartment?" "You gave me your address, remember? In case of emergencies." She looked at him with concern. "David, you look awful." David realized he was wearing the same clothes he had put on 3 days ago. His hair was messy, and he probably smelled bad. "Come in," he said, suddenly embarrassed. "I'm sorry. I wasn't expecting anyone." Luna walked into his apartment and looked around. It was a mess. Dirty dishes in the sink, papers scattered everywhere, curtains closed against the daylight. "David, what happened to you?" "I've been thinking," David said, sitting down heavily on his couch. "About the village. About what I did to you all. What you did to us." Luna sat beside him. "David, you gave us the most beautiful months we've had in years." And then I took it all away. Luna was quiet for a moment. That's why I came. To tell you what really happened after you left. David's heart sank. How bad is it? It was bad at first, Luna admitted. People were sad, disappointed. The gatherings got smaller again. Elena stopped teaching the children songs. I knew it, David said, putting his head in his hands. I ruined everything. No, listen to me, Luna said firmly. That's not the end of the story. She reached into her bag and pulled out a thick photo album. About a month after you left, something interesting happened. Elena's granddaughter came to visit from the city. The little girl was playing in Elena's house when she found your bird carving, the one Pedro made for you but you left behind. Luna opened the photo album and showed David a picture of a young girl holding the wooden bird. The little girl asked Elena what it was, so Elena started telling her the story behind the bird, the mythology you had been so excited to learn about. And as she was telling the story, Elena realized something. What? She realized that the story was just as beautiful whether you were there to hear it or not. The meaning didn't come from your excitement. It came from the story itself. Luna turned the page and showed David more photos. Pictures of Elena teaching her granddaughter traditional songs. Pictures of Pedro showing the little girl how to carve wood. The child stayed for 2 weeks. Every day she wanted to learn something new about our culture. And every day, Elena and Pedro and the others remembered what it felt like to share their knowledge with someone eager to learn. David looked at the photos, confused. But I thought everyone had given up. We had for a while. But then we realized something important. You didn't make our culture valuable by being excited about it. You showed us that our culture was valuable, enough to be excited about. Luna turned to another page showing a group of village children learning traditional dances. After Elena's granddaughter went back to the city, Elena started thinking differently. She decided that if one child from outside could fall in love with our traditions, maybe the children in our own village could too. But first, she had to fall in love with them again herself. What do you mean? She started practicing the songs. Again, not because someone else wanted to hear them, but because she remembered how beautiful they were. Pedro started carving again, not to impress visitors, but because he remembered how much joy it brought him. David studied the photos more carefully. In them, he could see villagers engaged in their traditions, but they looked different than they had when he was there. They looked independent, confident, like they were doing these things for themselves, not for an audience. But what about the gatherings, the ceremonies? Luna smiled. That's the best part. Once Elena and Pedro and the others started engaging with their culture for their own joy again, other people began to notice. The gatherings started growing again, but this time it was different. How was it different? Before you came, people attended out of duty. While you were with us, people attended because you were excited and they wanted to share in that excitement. But now, people attend because they remember why these traditions matter to them personally. Luna showed him a photo of the most recent village gathering. David counted at least 40 people in the picture, all smiling, all engaged. Your leaving forced us to find our own reasons for caring, Luna explained. It was painful at first, but it was necessary. David felt something shifting inside him. The heavy weight that had been pressing on his chest for months was starting to lift. So you don't need me anymore? Luna laughed. David, we never needed you. We needed what you represented, enthusiasm, curiosity, appreciation for our culture. But you helped us find those things in ourselves. Then why are you here? Luna's expression became serious. Because I heard from your sister. She called the village looking for you when she couldn't reach you for weeks. She was worried about you, and she thought maybe we could help. David felt embarrassed. She called the village? She cares about you, and so do we. David, you gave us something precious, but you're destroying yourself with guilt over leaving. That's not what we want. Luna stood up and walked to his window, opening the curtains David had kept closed for weeks. You helped us remember who we are. Now we want to help you remember who you are. Sunlight flooded into the apartment, making David squint. But for the first time in months, the light felt warm instead of harsh. I don't know who I am anymore, David said quietly. You're a filmmaker who cares about people and cultures. You're someone who gets excited about beautiful traditions and wants to share them with the world. You're not responsible for saving everyone, but you are responsible for being yourself. Luna sat back down beside him. The village sent me here with a message. We want you to finish your documentary. We want you to tell our story to the world. Not because we need you to save our culture, but because we're proud of our culture and we want others to know about it. And after that, you decide what makes you happy. Maybe you visit us sometimes. Maybe you document other cultures. Maybe you do something completely different. But you stop carrying the weight of our survival on your shoulders. For the first time in months, David smiled. When do we start? 1 year later, David stood at the edge of the mountain village watching the annual harvest festival. But this time, he wasn't the center of attention. He was just one of many people celebrating, and it felt perfect. The festival was bigger than anything David had seen during his original stay. Families had traveled from nearby villages to participate. Young people who had moved to cities had come home for the celebration. Children ran between the market stalls while their parents browsed traditional crafts and foods. Hard to believe this is the same place, said Alex, David's camera operator, as he filmed the festivities. It's not the same place, David replied, adjusting his microphone to capture Elena's voice as she led a group of children in traditional songs. It's better. Over the past year, David and Luna had worked together on something they called the Mountain Heritage Project. Instead of David being the sole source of enthusiasm for the village's culture, they had created ways for the community to share their traditions with the wider world. They had started a website where villagers could upload videos of themselves, performing traditional dances, telling old stories, or demonstrating ancient crafts. Elena had become a star, with her cooking videos getting thousands of views from people around the world who wanted to learn traditional mountain recipes. Pedro's carving tutorials had inspired woodworkers in 12 different countries to try traditional mountain techniques. He now sold his carved birds online and used the money to buy better tools and teach wood carving classes to village children. The project had also brought visitors to the village, but in a sustainable way. Instead of overwhelming the community, they had created a homestay program where families could host 1 or 2 guests at a time. Visitors came to learn specific skills: cooking with Anna, carving with Pedro, traditional weaving with Elena's daughter, Rosa. The beautiful thing, Luna had told David during one of their planning sessions, is that teaching these skills to others has reminded our own people why they're special. David watched as Elena demonstrated bread making to a group that included both village children and visiting tourists. Her hands moved confidently as she explained each step, her voice full of pride and joy. This wasn't the tired woman going through motions that David had first met. This was someone who knew her knowledge was valuable and loved sharing it. "David!" called Pedro from across the festival grounds. "Come see what the children made." David walked over to where Pedro had set up a display of wooden carvings. But these weren't Pedro's work. They were pieces made by village children during his wood carving classes. "Look at this bird," Pedro said, holding up a small but detailed carving. 10-year-old Carlos made this. His grandmother told him the story of the mountain spirits, and he wanted to carve their messenger bird. David examined the carving. It was simple but beautiful, full of the same care and meaning he had seen in Pedro's work. "Carlos," David called to the boy who was showing his carving to a group of visitors. "This is incredible. How long have you been learning to carve?" 6 months, Carlos said proudly. "Pedro says I have natural talent. My grandmother says our ancestors are guiding my hands." As the afternoon continued, David found himself in conversations with villagers about their projects and plans. Rosa was organizing a traditional textile exhibition for the next summer. Elena was working on a cookbook of traditional recipes. A group of teenagers had started a folk music band that mixed traditional mountain songs with modern instruments. Everyone was busy, excited, engaged with their culture in ways that felt natural and self-sustaining. "Remember when you were worried about leaving us?" Luna asked, finding David near the end of the festival day. "I remember thinking your culture would die without me," David said, shaking his head at his past arrogance. "And look at us now." David looked around the festival. Children were learning traditional games from their grandparents. Young adults were discussing plans for expanding the heritage website. Visitors were exchanging contact information with their host families, planning return visits. "You're thriving," David said. "Better than when I was here full-time. Because now we're doing it for ourselves, not for you." "Don't get me wrong," Luna added quickly. "Your enthusiasm was important. It reminded us that our traditions were worth being enthusiastic about. But sustained passion has to come from within." As the evening approached, David helped clean up from the festival. But he noticed something interesting. He wasn't essential to the cleanup process. People had their own systems, their own ways of organizing things. They appreciated his help, but they didn't need it. Later that night, the village held its traditional end-of-harvest ceremony. David participated, but as one voice among many, not as the special guest everyone was performing for. Elena sang the Mountain Spirit song, the same one she had taught David during his first visit. But now she wasn't teaching it to him. She was leading the entire community in singing it together, their voices blending in. 3 weeks later, David found himself bouncing along a mountain road in Luna's old Jeep. The city felt like a distant memory as they climbed higher into the hills. Pine trees lined both sides of the narrow path, and the air got cooler with every mile. "Almost there," Luna said, pointing ahead to where smoke was rising from several chimneys. "That's my village." David's first impression was how peaceful everything looked. Small stone houses with red tile roofs dotted the mountainside. Gardens full of vegetables grew behind each home. Children played in the dusty main street while their mothers hung laundry on lines between the houses. But as the days passed, David began to notice things that Luna had tried to prepare him for. The village was quiet in a way that felt empty rather than peaceful. Most of the young adults were gone, working in distant cities. The people who remained seemed to go through their daily routines without much joy. On his third evening there, David attended what Luna called a traditional gathering. About 15 elderly villagers sat in a circle in the community hall. They sang old songs and performed dances that had been passed down for generations. But something felt wrong. The singers looked tired, like they were doing something out of duty rather than love. The dancers moved correctly, but their hearts didn't seem to be in it. Even Luna, who had been so passionate at the cultural center, seemed different here, more subdued. After the gathering ended, David approached one of the elders, a woman named Elena, who had been leading the songs. "That was beautiful," he told her honestly. "How long has your community been doing these ceremonies?" Elena smiled, but it was a sad smile. "My grandmother taught me these songs when I was 7 years old. Her grandmother taught them to her. We don't know how many generations back they go." "Do you enjoy singing them?" David asked. Elena looked surprised by the question. "Enjoy? Well, it's important to keep them alive. Someone has to remember." That night, David couldn't sleep. He kept thinking about Elena's words. Someone has to remember. It sounded more like a burden than a blessing. The next morning, he found Luna sitting by the village well, looking thoughtful. "Can I ask you something?" David said as he sat beside her. "Yesterday at the gathering, why did everyone seem so sad?" Luna sighed. "They're not sad exactly. They're tired," For years, they've been the only ones keeping our traditions alive. Young people leave, visitors don't come, and slowly these beautiful ceremonies became something they do alone for no one. But they're not alone now, David pointed out. I'm here. You're one person, and you're visiting. Tomorrow or next week, you'll go back to your life in the city. David understood what she meant, but something inside him rebelled against that. Dia. What if I don't just visit? What if I really learn? Luna looked at him curiously. What do you mean? I mean, what if I actually participate? Not just film and document, but really become part of it? That afternoon, David did something that surprised everyone, including himself. When the children were playing in the street, he joined them. When the women were preparing dinner together, he asked if he could help. When the men were fixing a roof, he climbed up the ladder and started handing them tools. By evening, something had changed in the village. People were talking more, laughing more. The children followed David around, fascinated by this stranger who wanted to learn their games. At dinner, instead of sitting quietly like a polite guest, David asked questions. Lots of questions. Elena, could you teach me that song from yesterday? The one about the mountain spirits? Pedro, I saw you carving something this morning. What were you making? Anna, those flowers you're growing, are they used in ceremonies? Elena blinked in surprise. You want to learn the mountain spirit song? But it's in our old language. It's very difficult. I want to try, David said simply. Something magical happened when Elena began teaching David the song. Her voice, which had sounded tired the night before, became stronger, more confident. Other villagers gathered around to listen. Some began humming along. Pedro, the wood carver, brought out the piece he had been working on, a small bird with intricate details. I was making this for my granddaughter in the city, he explained. But she probably won't understand what it means. What does it mean? David asked, genuinely curious. Pedro's eyes lit up as he began explaining the significance of the bird in their mythology. Soon, other villagers were sharing their own stories, their own crafts, their own memories. Over the following days, David threw himself into learning everything he could. He stumbled through dance steps, mispronounced words in the ancient language, and burned the traditional bread on his first attempt at baking it. But his mistakes didn't seem to matter. In fact, they seemed to make everyone more comfortable. When David got confused during a ceremony and turned left instead of right, the whole room burst into gentle laughter. When he asked Elena to repeat a song 3 times because he couldn't remember the melody, she seemed delighted to teach him. You know, Elena told him one evening, I haven't sung that mountain spirit song so many times in years. Usually I sing it once at gatherings and that's it. But teaching it to you, it feels alive again. David began to notice other changes. More villagers started showing up to the evening gatherings. Not just the usual 15 elders, but younger adults who had been working late, teenagers who usually stayed home, even some children. Luna watched these changes with wonder. I don't understand what's happening, she told David as they walked through the village one evening. These same people have been doing these same ceremonies for years, but now it's different. How is it different? David asked. They're smiling, Luna said simply. When they dance now, they're actually smiling. David thought about this. Maybe it's because they remember why these traditions matter. When you're teaching someone else, when you see someone get excited about something you've always known, it reminds you why it's special. That weekend, something unprecedented happened. The village decided to hold an impromptu festival. Not because it was a traditional holiday, but just because they felt like celebrating. People brought out instruments that had been stored away for months. Women wore their traditional dresses that usually only came out for major ceremonies. Men taught David traditional games they hadn't played in years. Children who had been shy and quiet were now running around, participating in everything. Teenagers who had seemed bored were now helping their grandparents teach David different crafts and skills. As David watched the celebration, he realized something important. He hadn't just been learning about their culture. He had been giving them an audience for it. For years, these people had been preserving their traditions in isolation. Now they had someone who was genuinely excited to learn, someone who appreciated what they had to offer. But as the festival continued into the night, David also realized something that made him a little uncomfortable. People kept thanking him, as if he had done something special. They acted like his presence had somehow saved their celebration. "David," Elena said, taking his hands in hers, "you have brought life back to our village. Our traditions feel important again." David smiled, but inside he was starting to worry. What would happen when he eventually had to leave? Would the life go out of their traditions again? Had he accidentally made himself necessary to their happiness? Looking around at all the smiling faces, at Luna, who looked more alive than he had ever seen her, David pushed those worries aside. For now, he was just grateful to be part of something so beautiful and meaningful. He had no idea that his growing importance to the village would soon become both a blessing and a burden he never expected to carry.